My immigrant parents kept a leather ledger, tracking my $73,492 debt since birth. Every grade below 100 added 1,000 and made my little sister suffer. When I got into medical school, they made me sign over 100% of my future income, but after my sister escaped to Switzerland on a secret scholarship, they lost their leverage and broke into my apartment, forged bank fraud in my name, and got me arrested for trespassing in my childhood home. At trial, my sister's friend from Switzerland revealed medical records of my parents, breaking my sister's bones when I failed tests. My immigrant parents sacrificed everything to come here. They reminded me daily. So when I was accepted to medical school, it wasn't my dream, it was my duty. Every grade below an A meant I was ungrateful. Every moment not studying was betrayal. They planned my entire life. Doctor by 26, married by 27, grandchildren by 30, and a house big enough for them to move in. They tracked my study hours, chose my friends, and interviewed my dates. When I suggested switching to teaching, my mother didn't speak to me for 3 months, but that was nothing compared to what they threatened to do to my little sister if I ever tried to leave. It started when I was 7. My father brought home a leather ledger after my sister Alice was born. In America, he said, showing me the book, children must pay back their parents. See, here is your debt. $73,492, itemized since birth. But Alice, he smiled at the baby, she's lucky. She has you. That's when I learned the rules. Every point below 100 on my tests added $1,000 to what I owed. But worse, it meant Alice would have to start working younger. If you fail, my mother explained, she pays too. That's family. By middle school, the threats were specific. When I got an 89 on a science test, they made Alice, then 6, miss her meals. Your selfishness makes your sister hungry, they said. When I fell asleep studying, they'd wake Alice and make her stand in the corner. Your laziness steals her sleep. I tried to protect her, studied harder, slept less, but they always found failures. A yawn during tutoring meant Alice did my chores. A B+ meant she couldn't attend her friend's birthday party. They made sure she knew why. Your sister doesn't care about your happiness. The first time I mentioned wanting to leave for college out of state, they showed me documents they'd forged, bank accounts in my name, loans I'd never taken. We can destroy your future with one phone call, my father said. But we won't need to, because you won't abandon Alice to pay your debts. They were right. I couldn't leave her. High school was medical boot camp. Up at 4 a.m. for pre-study, school, tutoring, study until 2 a.m. Repeat. When I begged for a break, they brought Alice to my room. Tell her, they commanded. Tell her you want a break while she suffers for your laziness. Alice, then 10, hugged me. It's okay, she whispered. I understand you're tired. That kindness broke something in me. I studied through migraines, nosebleeds, fainting spells, whatever it took to protect her. College meant leaving Alice behind. Don't worry, my mother smiled as I packed. Every failed test, every imperfect grade, Alice will help pay for it. They sent photos as proof. Alice doing my old chores, Alice eating alone while they dined out, Alice slept on the floor because I'd gotten a 94 on an organic chemistry exam. Come home and study properly, the texts read, or she suffers more. I couldn't, but I couldn't abandon her either, so I negotiated. Perfect grades meant Alice got privileges. Med school acceptance meant she could have friends. Every achievement, I unlocked a piece of her childhood. The contract came with my Harvard acceptance. 100% of my future income until the debt was paid. Now $340,000, then 75% for life. But hidden in subsection 47B was the real trap. If I defaulted, all debts transferred to Alice, starting immediately. She's 14, I protested. Old enough to work, my father said. Old enough to pay if you run. I signed. What choice did I have? Medical school nearly unalived me. They demanded daily reports, recorded phone calls where I recited my grades. Any slip meant punishment for Alice. When I got a B+ in biochemistry, they sent me a video of her crying, doing calculus problems at 3 a.m. Your sister is lazy, they told her, so you must work harder. But Alice grew stronger than they expected, started texting me in code. I'm okay, hidden in homework questions. Don't give up, tucked between math problems. I love you, signed in the corner of essays they made her write about disappointment. Senior year, I matched in pediatrics. The call was volcanic. Pediatricians make nothing. You've doomed us all. Alice will work factories to pay your selfishness. That night, Alice called from a friend's phone. I got a full scholarship, she whispered, to boarding school in Switzerland. They can't reach me there. How? I've been planning since I was 12. Hiding money, forging their signatures, everything they taught you about suffering. I learned about escaping. She left that summer, disappeared completely, changed her name, cut all ties, free. My parents raged, threatened, but without Alice as leverage, they had nothing. I had them right where I wanted them. The silence that followed Alice's escape was deafening. My parents sat at the kitchen table for 3 days straight, the leather ledger open between them, recalculating numbers that no longer mattered. I watched from the doorway as my father's pen scratched across the pages, adding compound interest to debts that would never be collected. My mother finally looked up on the third evening. Her eyes were hollow, but something darker flickered behind them. She stood slowly, walked to the stove, and began preparing dinner as if nothing had happened. But I noticed her hands shaking as she chopped vegetables. The knife slipped once, twice. The third time, she embedded it in the cutting board and left it there. That night, they called a family meeting. I sat across from them, the same table where they'd tracked my failures for 20 years. My father pulled out a new folder, thick with documents, bank statements, loan applications, investment accounts, all in my name, all fraudulent. He spread them across the table methodically. 23 separate accounts, loans totaling $847,000, credit cards maxed out, investment losses that would destroy any future I might build. My signature on every page, perfectly forged. My mother finally spoke. Her voice was calm, too calm. She explained how they'd been preparing for years, every document backdated, calculated, every transaction carefully timed, a paper trail so thorough that even I almost believed I'd signed them. But they'd made one mistake. In their rage over Alice's escape, they'd shown their hand too early. The newest documents were dated after Alice left, when they were too emotional to be careful. Inconsistencies in the signatures, wrong addresses, impossible timelines. I memorized every detail while pretending to crumble, let my shoulders shake, covered my face with my hands. Through my fingers, I watched them exchange satisfied looks. They thought they'd won. The next morning, I went to work at the hospital as usual. During my lunch break, I visited the bank, not to withdraw money, but to request copies of all accounts in my name. The teller's expression changed as she pulled up screen after screen. She excused herself, returned with a manager. They gave me everything: transaction histories, account applications, security footage of my parents making deposits and withdrawals. They'd been sloppy, desperate, used their own IDs sometimes, left a trail of evidence in their haste to control me. I thanked the bank staff and left with 3 boxes of documents. In my car, I photographed every page, uploaded them to multiple cloud accounts, sent copies to a secure email that my parents didn't know existed. That evening, my parents were waiting in my apartment. They'd used their copy of my key. My mother sat on my couch, flipping through my mail. My father stood by the window, watching the street below. They wanted me to know they could enter my life whenever they chose. I acted surprised, then defeated, slumped into a chair and asked what they wanted. My father smiled. The terms were simple: 100% of my income, immediately, power of attorney over all my affairs, weekly meetings to review my spending, and most importantly, I would help them find Alice. I nodded slowly, as if considering, asked for time to think. My mother laughed. Time? After 26 years of investment, they wanted returns now. She pulled out a new contract, even more binding than the last. Sign now, or they'd make the calls that would end my career before it began. I reached for the pen, hesitated. My hand shook as I brought it to the paper. Then I set it down and asked to read the contract first. My father's face darkened, but he nodded. Let the ungrateful child read. The result would be the same. The contract was a masterpiece of control. Every aspect of my life regulated, every dollar accounted for. But buried in the subsections were their real plans: access to my medical license to write prescriptions, authority to take loans in my name, power to make medical decisions for any future children I might have. They planned to use me as a puppet, a licensed doctor under their complete control. The earning potential, the respectability, the access to systems and databases. Everything they'd lost with Alice, they'd regain through me. I finished reading and looked up. Their faces were eager now, hungry. 20 years of investment about to pay off. I picked up the pen again, clicked it open, brought it to the signature line. Then I set it down again and smiled. The change in their expressions was instant. Confusion, then anger, then something close to fear. I pulled out my phone, showed them the photos I'd taken at the bank, their faces in security footage, their signatures on fraudulent documents, their fingerprints on forged applications. My mother lunged for my phone. I stepped back, already uploading everything to social media. Not publicly, not yet, but to a private group of extended family. Aunts and uncles, cousins, family friends who'd always wondered why I looked so tired, why Alice had disappeared. The evidence was overwhelming. 20 years of financial fraud documented in detail. Every forged signature, every illegal transaction, every threat recorded, because I'd been recording our conversations for months, preparing for this moment. There's something oddly specific about that leather ledger with $73,492 written in it, like they'd been planning this whole debt system before she was even old enough to understand money. I wonder if they brought that tradition from somewhere or just made it up. My father tried reasoning first. Family matters should stay private. What would people think? The shame it would bring. How it would reflect on me, their son, to expose them this way. When that didn't work, they switched to threats. They still had documents, still had ways to hurt me, but their threats felt hollow now. Without Alice as leverage, without the element of surprise, they were just 2 aging criminals who'd finally been caught. I gave them a choice: leave, disappear like Alice had, take whatever money they'd stolen over the years and start over somewhere else, or stay and face the consequences when I made everything public. They didn't believe I'd do it. 20 years of conditioning told them I'd submit. That family honor would prevent me from exposing them, that the guilt they'd programmed into me would stop me from fighting back. I started typing a message to the family group, attached the first document. My finger hovered over send. My mother was crying now, real tears for the first time I could remember. My father's hands shook as he reached for the contract, as if signing it himself could fix everything. I hit send. The responses came immediately: shock, anger, demands for explanation. My phone buzzed constantly as family members who'd been told I was successful, grateful, devoted, learned the truth. 20 years of lies unraveling in real time. My parents' phones started ringing. My father answered the first call, tried to explain, to minimize, but the evidence was too clear. The second call was angrier. By the third, he stopped answering. They left that night, packed what they could carry, and disappeared. No forwarding address, no goodbye, just gone, like Alice, but without her grace or planning. They left behind the leather ledger, still open to the page calculating Alice's debts. I burned it in my sink, watching 20 years of manipulation turn to ash. But I kept the photos, the evidence, the recordings, not for revenge, but for protection. They were out there somewhere, planning, plotting, waiting. The family group chat exploded with support, offers of help, apologies for not seeing it sooner, stories of their own suspicions, moments when something seemed wrong but they'd stayed silent, the uncle who'd noticed bruises, the aunt who'd wondered why we never visited, the cousins who'd been told we thought we were too good for them. I moved apartments the next week, changed my locks, updated all my passwords, froze my credit, started the long process of untangling the financial mess they'd created. Each step felt like shedding weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. Work became my refuge. The hospital, once a a prison built from their demands, transformed into a place I'd chosen. Pediatrics, which they'd scorned for its low pay, became my calling. Every child I helped felt like honoring the childhood they'd stolen from Alice and me, but I knew they weren't finished. People like my parents didn't simply disappear. They regrouped, they planned, they waited for weakness. The extended family reported strange calls, questions about me, attempts to reconnect, to explain their side. I documented everything, every contact, every attempt, built a file as thick as the one they'd built against me. But this time, the evidence was real, the crimes actual, the paper trail legitimate. 3 months later, I got a text from an unknown number, a single line. "Your sister says hello." My heart stopped. Was it them, using Alice as bait? Or was it really her, finally safe enough to reach out? I stared at the message for hours, analyzed every word, searched for hidden meanings, threats, traps. But sometimes a message is just what it seems. Sometimes sisters find ways to say hello across continents and years of silence. I typed back carefully, "Tell her I'm free too." The response came immediately. "She knows. She always knew you would be." That night, I slept without nightmares for the first time in 20 years. But I kept my phone close, my documents backed up, my evidence ready. Freedom was new, fragile, something to be guarded, because I knew my parents were out there, somewhere, planning their return. And when they came, I'd be ready. But for now, in this moment, I was free. Alice was free. And that was enough. The next morning brought new challenges. My parents had been busy in their exile. Letters arrived from collection agencies, calls from creditors. The loans they'd taken in my name were coming due, each one a trap they'd set, triggered by their absence. I spent the day on the phone with fraud departments, explaining, providing evidence, starting the long process of clearing my name. Some believed me immediately. Others required lawyers, affidavits, police reports. The web they'd woven was intricate, designed to collapse if they ever lost control. But I had something they hadn't counted on: time and determination. Every fraudulent account closed felt like victory. Every cleared debt lifted weight from my shoulders. I was dismantling their machine piece by piece, gear by gear. The hospital administration called me in. Someone had sent them an anonymous letter detailing my family situation, suggesting I might be unstable, unreliable. The accusations were vague but damaging, the kind that planted doubt without proof. I laid out everything for them: the evidence, the fraud, the years of abuse, the escape. They listened, reviewed my documents, checked my work history. My record was spotless. My patients loved me. My colleagues respected me. The letter was dismissed, but the message was clear. My parents weren't done. The anonymous letter to my workplace was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, similar letters appeared at my landlord's office, my gym, even the coffee shop where I studied, each one carefully worded to avoid outright lies while painting me as troubled, potentially dangerous. The barista who'd served me for years suddenly watched me with wary eyes. My landlord started finding excuses to inspect my apartment. I recognized my mother's handwriting in the careful loops and curves, disguised but not enough. She'd taught me those same letters when I was 5, making me practice until my fingers cramped. Now she used them as weapons. The fraud departments moved slowly. Each cleared account required documentation, verification, waiting periods. Meanwhile, new accounts appeared faster than I could close them. Credit cards in my name arrived at old addresses. Loan applications surfaced at banks I'd never visited. My credit score plummeted daily. One evening after a particularly long shift, I found my apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing stolen, nothing obviously disturbed, but small things had shifted. A photo frame angled differently, books rearranged on my shelf. My medical school diploma moved half an inch to the left. They wanted me to know they'd been there. I installed new locks, a security system, cameras. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. My father's handwriting this time. A single line: "Locks only work if you're inside." Attached was a photo of me at the hospital, taken from across the street. In the corner, barely visible, the timestamp showed it was taken while I was operating on a child. The extended family's support began to waver. My parents had started their own campaign. Phone calls at odd hours, sob stories about ungrateful children, twisted versions of events that painted them as victims. Some relatives began asking if maybe I'd misunderstood, if perhaps we could reconcile, if family wasn't worth preserving. My cousin Alexandra called one night, voice strained. My parents had visited her, bringing gifts for her children. They'd been charming, apologetic. They'd shown her their own documents, bank statements showing money they claimed I'd stolen. Forged, of course, but convincing. She didn't accuse me directly, but her doubt was clear. The hospital received more letters. Now they came from concerned citizens who'd heard troubling rumors, each from a different address, different handwriting. My parents had recruited help, or learned to disguise their writing better. HR started documenting everything, building their own file. Not against me, they assured, but the scrutiny exhausted me. I began finding my car tires deflated, not slashed, nothing that would warrant police involvement, just flat enough to make me late. It happened randomly, unpredictably, sometimes twice a week, sometimes not for days. I started leaving earlier, checking my tires obsessively. The paranoia they wanted me to feel took root. My bank called about suspicious activity. Someone had tried accessing my accounts from multiple locations. The attempts failed, but each one triggered security protocols that froze my cards. I'd stand at grocery stores, gas stations, restaurants, while my cards were declined. The embarrassment was intentional, calculated. Then came the packages, delivered to my workplace, my home, addresses of extended family. Nothing threatening, nothing illegal, just photos from my childhood. Report cards showing less than perfect grades, medical bills from when I'd been sick and couldn't study. Each package painted me as the burden they'd always claimed I was. My aunt called, confused and hurt. She'd received a package with photos of family gatherings I'd missed, letters I'd supposedly written about being too good for family events, all forged, but mixed with enough truth to seem real. The doubt in her voice cut deep. My parents knew exactly which relationships to target. I hired a lawyer, spending money I didn't have. She reviewed everything, built a case for harassment. But harassment was hard to prove when the perpetrators stayed just within legal bounds. No direct threats, no physical harm, just a slow, methodical destruction of my life's foundations. The pediatric ward became my only sanctuary. My young patients didn't care about anonymous letters or family drama. 20 years of fake tears, and finally mom cries for real when her control crumbles. That's the kind of plot twist that would make soap opera writers jealous. They needed help, and I could provide it. But even there, my parents' influence crept in. A mother requested a different doctor, having heard concerning things. A father watched me suspiciously during rounds. One morning, I arrived to find my locker emptied onto the break room floor. Security footage showed nothing, the cameras mysteriously malfunctioning during that hour. My colleagues helped me gather my things, but I saw the questions in their eyes. How much smoke before there was fire? My parents grew bolder. I spotted my father outside the hospital one evening, talking to a security guard. By the time I reached the entrance, he'd vanished. But the guard now watched me differently, hand hovering near his radio when I passed. The financial harassment escalated. Collection agencies called during surgeries, leaving voicemails that filled my phone. Each call required hours to resolve, proving again that the debts weren't mine. But new agencies called daily, the cycle endless. My parents had found companies that didn't verify thoroughly before pursuing claims. I started sleeping at the hospital some nights, afraid to go home. The call rooms were small but secure, no windows for watching, locks that actually worked. But sleeping at work raised more eyebrows, fed more rumors about my stability. Then I found the tracker on my car, hidden under the bumper, professional grade. How long had they been following me? Every safe space I'd thought I had was compromised. I left it there, not wanting them to know I'd found it. But I started taking different routes, parking blocks away, walking in circles. My cousin Theodore reached out, one of the few who still believed me. He'd been getting calls too, my parents asking about my schedule, my habits, my friends. He'd refused to answer, but others might not. My entire extended network had become potential informants. The breaking point came when I received a letter at work, not anonymous this time, from a patient's family, withdrawing their child from my care. They'd received information about my background that concerned them. Attached was a copy of what they'd been sent, photos of me looking exhausted during residency, medical records from my stress-related health issues, all twisted to suggest incompetence. I sat in the break room, letter trembling in my hands. 20 years of sacrifice to become a doctor, and they were systematically destroying it. Not through lies alone, but by weaponizing truth. Every moment of weakness I'd shown while protecting Alice now served their narrative. That night, I called the unknown number that had claimed to be from Alice. No answer. I texted, begging for confirmation it was really her. Hours passed, then a response. They're watching this number now. Find another way. My parents had discovered even that thin connection. I deleted the messages, but damage was done. They knew Alice and I had contact. The hunt would intensify. I started documenting everything obsessively. Every flat tire, every strange call, every moved object in my apartment. The file grew thick, but what good was evidence when the harassment was designed to be unprovable? Death by 1,000 invisible cuts. My hospital supervisor called me in again. More complaints had arrived. Nothing actionable, but the volume was concerning. She believed me, she said, but the hospital had to consider its reputation. Perhaps some time off would help. Let things settle. I knew what that meant. Time off would become extended leave. Extended leave would become quiet termination. My parents understood institutional self-preservation better than I'd credited. They didn't need to destroy me directly. They just needed to make me too much trouble to keep. That evening, I found my apartment ransacked. Not burglarized, nothing stolen, but every drawer opened, every paper scattered. My medical diplomas were stacked on the kitchen table, my parents' signatures added to the corners in red ink. We made this possible. The message was clear. I called the police. They took notes, looked at the security footage that showed nothing. No forced entry, no evidence of intruders, just an apartment that looked like its occupant had torn it apart. I saw their exchanged glances. Another unstable doctor overwhelmed by stress. My lawyer called with bad news. The harassment case was weak. Everything could be explained away. Coincidences, misunderstandings, family disputes that didn't rise to criminal level. She'd keep building the file, but warned me to lower expectations. The next morning brought a new crisis. My medical license was under review. Anonymous complaints had been filed with the board. Nothing specific enough to act on immediately, but enough to trigger investigation. The review would take months. During that time, every aspect of my career would be scrutinized. I drove to work in a daze. In the parking garage, I found my father waiting by my car. He didn't approach, didn't speak, just stood there, watching. When security arrived, he was gone, but the message was delivered. They could reach me anywhere. Inside, I found my schedule had been adjusted. Fewer surgeries, more paperwork, administrative tasks that kept me away from patients. The hospital was protecting itself, creating distance. My colleagues were sympathetic but careful. Association with trouble was contagious. That afternoon, I received a package at the nurse's station. Inside, a photo album I recognized. Pictures from my childhood, but altered. My face scratched out in every image. Alice's too. In their place, red ink calculations, dollar amounts, hours owed, debts that would never die. I locked myself in a supply closet and broke down. 20 years of strength crumbled. They were winning. Without violence, without breaking laws, they were dismantling my life piece by piece. Every achievement, every relationship, every safe space violated. My phone buzzed. An email from an unknown address. Subject line, from A. My hands shook as I opened it. A single sentence. Check the old hiding spot. My heart raced. Alice and I had shared a hiding spot as children. A loose brick in the basement wall where we'd left notes when speaking was dangerous. But going to my parents' house was insane. It had to be a trap. They wanted me to trespass, to give them legal ammunition. But what if it was really from Alice? What if she'd found a way to help? I spent the rest of my shift distracted. Every patient interaction felt hollow. My mind was in that basement, wondering what message might be waiting. By evening, I'd decided. I had to know. The drive to my childhood home felt like traveling back in time. Each familiar street carried memories of walking to school, shoulders bent under the weight of textbooks and expectations. The house looked exactly the same. Pristine lawn, perfect paint, no sign of the dysfunction within. I parked a block away and waited. Lights went out at exactly 10 p.m., as they had for 20 years. My parents' routines were fixed, predictable. I waited another hour, then approached through the backyard. The basement window still had the same broken latch I'd never reported, afraid of the punishment for breaking it. Inside, the basement smelled of mildew and old paper. Boxes of my childhood achievements lined the walls. Report cards, test papers, certificates, all evidence of their investment. I found the loose brick, pried it free. Inside, an envelope with my name in Alice's handwriting. But as I reached for it, the lights blazed on. My parents stood on the stairs, my father holding a camera. They'd been waiting. The email wasn't from Alice, just another manipulation, another trap. Now they had photos of me breaking into their home. My mother smiled coldly. She explained their new terms. I would sign over power of attorney. I would give them full access to my finances. I would help them find Alice. Or the photos would go to police, my employer, the medical board, breaking and entering, trespassing. More evidence of my instability. I stood slowly, mind racing. The envelope was still in the hiding spot. Real or fake? I needed to know. I grabbed it as my father shouted. Inside, a single word in Alice's childhood handwriting. Run. I pushed past them, my father grabbing at my shirt. My mother screamed about calling police. I broke free, sprinting through the house I'd once called home. Behind me, my father's heavy footsteps. My mother's voice on the phone, playing victim. I reached my car as sirens wailed in the distance. Drove carefully, legally, knowing they'd report my license plate. At the first red light, I called my lawyer, explaining everything. She told me to drive directly to the police station, to file my own report first, to control the narrative, but I knew it wouldn't matter. They had photos. I had entered illegally, my word against theirs, and they'd spent months establishing me as unstable. The perfect trap, perfectly executed. I pulled into the police station as units raced past, heading to my parents' house. Inside, I explained everything to a skeptical desk sergeant. The years of abuse, the harassment campaign, the forged email. He took notes, expression neutral, said detectives would be in touch. Hours later, I sat in an interrogation room. My parents had filed charges, breaking and entering, attempted theft, harassment. The detectives had their photos, their tears, their elderly victim act. I had conspiracy theories and family drama. I could see who they believed. My lawyer arrived as they read my rights. She'd brought some of my evidence, but it felt thin under fluorescent lights. Family disputes weren't criminal. Trespassing was. The detective suggested I focus on defending against real charges instead of making accusations. They released me on my own recognizance. Court date in 2 weeks. My lawyer warned me to stay away from my parents to avoid any contact, as if I hadn't been trying, as if they weren't the ones hunting me. Finding a professional tracker under the car makes me wonder exactly how these parents learned such specific harassment techniques. This feels like more than just controlling behavior. There's something calculated about their methods that's genuinely unsettling right now. I returned to find my apartment locks changed, an eviction notice on the door. My landlord had received the police report. Criminal activity violated my lease. I had 72 hours to vacate. My neighbors watched through cracked doors as I read the notice. The hospital had received the news too. Suspended pending investigation. My badge deactivated. My locker cleaned out and boxed. HR explained it was protocol. Any arrest triggered review. They'd wait for legal resolution, but the message was clear. Start looking for new employment. My phone rang constantly. Extended family who'd heard about my arrest, some offering help, others distancing themselves. The narrative had shifted completely. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the unstable son who'd broken into his elderly parents' home. I spent the night in my car, parked outside a 24-hour diner. Inside, I spread out my evidence. Financial fraud, harassment documentation, years of abuse records, all worthless against a simple trespassing charge with photographic evidence. My phone buzzed. Another unknown number. I almost ignored it, but desperation won. The voice was young, female, accented. She introduced herself as Ailey, Alice's friend from Switzerland. Alice had heard about my arrest. She was coming back. I begged Ailey to stop her. Coming back meant walking into my parents' trap, but the line went dead. I called back repeatedly. No answer. Alice was returning, and I couldn't protect her any more than I'd protected myself. The next morning, I started apartment hunting with an arrest on my record. Most landlords ended conversations upon background check. My savings dwindled with hotel costs. My parents had achieved in months what 20 years of direct abuse hadn't. Complete isolation. But I kept fighting. Found a weekly rental in a rough neighborhood. Cash only. No questions asked. I moved my few possessions, setting up security cameras immediately. If they found me here, at least I'd have footage. My lawyer called with strategy. Plead to lesser charges. Accept a restraining order. Focus on rebuilding rather than fighting. But accepting guilt meant validating their narrative. It meant giving them the final victory they'd orchestrated. I refused. We'd fight the charges. Present our evidence. Hope for understanding. She warned me about jury perception. Elderly immigrant parents versus their arrested son. The optics were terrible, but I couldn't plead guilty to entering my own childhood home. The medical board moved faster than the courts. Immediate suspension pending criminal resolution. Years of perfect record meant nothing against active charges. My career hung by threads my parents systematically cut. Then came unexpected hope. My colleague Dr. O'Theodore called. The pediatric ward had started a petition. Nurses, doctors, even janitors signing support. They'd seen my work. They knew my character. It wouldn't restore my license, but it reminded me I wasn't completely alone. More support emerged. The bank manager who'd helped expose the fraud wrote a character letter. The security guard who'd seen my father lurking came forward. Small voices against the storm, but voices nonetheless. My parents escalated again. They filed civil suits. Emotional distress, defamation, elder abuse, each requiring lawyers I couldn't afford, each adding to the narrative of their victimhood. The local news picked up the story. Successful immigrant parents betrayed by ungrateful son. I watched the coverage from my motel room. They'd given interviews, tears perfectly timed, showed the photos of me in their basement, displayed the leather ledger as evidence of their sacrifice. The reporter never asked about the impossible debt calculations or why a child owed money for being born, but something else appeared in the coverage. A brief mention that their daughter had been estranged for years. No details, but a crack in their perfect parent image. I wondered if Alice had seen it, wherever she was. That night, I dreamed of my childhood basement, Alice and I hiding notes in the brick, planning escapes we were too young to execute. In the dream, she was free, and I was trapped. When I woke, I realized it wasn't a dream. It was exactly what had happened. Court date approached like a storm. My lawyer prepared meticulously, but warned me about bias. Judges saw family disputes daily. Elderly parents estranged from children. The sympathy rarely went to the younger generation. Prepare for the worst, she said. I prepared by working, not at the hospital, but at a free clinic in my rough neighborhood. Volunteer work only. No medical license required for basic care. The patients didn't care about my arrest. They needed help. I could still provide some. The clinic director, Dr. McAlexandra, had her own story. Parents who'd controlled through guilt rather than debt. She understood immediately. Offered me regular volunteer shifts. No pay, but purpose. Something my parents couldn't steal. 3 days before court, Ailey called again. Alice was in the country, watching, waiting. She had evidence, Ailey said, but wouldn't reveal what. She needed to see how the hearing went first. I begged for more information, but Ailey hung up. I spent those days in a haze, volunteering at the clinic, meeting with my lawyer, avoiding the increasing media coverage. My parents had given more interviews, each painting them as victims of American culture corrupting their children. The night before court, I couldn't sleep. I reviewed every document, every photo, every piece of evidence that might save me. But I knew the real evidence was simpler. Two elderly parents with tears and photos versus their arrested son with conspiracy theories. Morning came too soon. I dressed in my only suit, the one I'd worn to medical school interviews. In the mirror, I looked guilty, exhausted, defeated. Exactly what the court would expect from someone who'd broken into his parents' home. The courthouse steps were crowded. Extended family had come, divided into camps. Some supporting my parents, others maintaining neutral distance. A few brave souls nodded at me. Most avoided eye contact. Inside, my parents sat with their lawyer. They'd aged in the months since I'd seen them, played up their frailty. My mother clutched tissues. My father leaned on a cane I'd never seen before. The performance was beginning. As we waited for the judge, I scanned the gallery. Colleagues from the hospital, the bank manager, Dr. McAlexandra, all risking association with scandal to support me. But no Alice. Whatever evidence she had, she wasn't ready to reveal it. The bailiff called us to rise. The judge entered, expression neutral. She'd review evidence, hear testimony, decide if my life would be destroyed by a single moment of desperate curiosity in my childhood basement. My lawyer squeezed my shoulder. Whatever happened, we'd presented truth. Sometimes that was all you could do. Stand up to lies with facts and hope someone listened. Hope the system worked. Hope that 20 years of manipulation would finally be exposed. As the prosecutor began outlining the charges, I straightened my shoulders. My parents had taken my home, my career, my reputation, but they hadn't broken me. Not completely. And somewhere out there, Alice was watching, waiting, planning. The middle act of our story was ending. The final confrontation approached. Everything they'd built would come crashing down. I just had to survive long enough to see it happen. The prosecutor's opening statement painted me as unstable, dangerous, a son who'd terrorized his elderly immigrant parents. The photos were damning. Me, caught in their basement at night, their frightened faces, the broken window latch I'd used to enter. My lawyer countered with context. 20 years of documented abuse, financial fraud totaling hundreds of thousands. But context felt weak against those photos. The judge's expression remained neutral, giving nothing away. During the first recess, I noticed movement in the gallery. A young woman I didn't recognize slipped into a back row seat. Dark hair, European features. My heart raced. Could it be Alice? But when I looked again, she'd moved, always keeping her face partially hidden. The prosecution called my parents first. My mother took the stand slowly, playing up her age. She described finding me in their home, the terror she'd felt, how I'd pushed past them, assaulted them in my escape. Lies wrapped in tears, delivered perfectly. My father followed, leaning heavily on his cane. He spoke of their sacrifices, their love, their confusion at my behavior. He produced the leather ledger, showing the judge their careful accounting of expenses. Normal parental record-keeping, he claimed. Nothing sinister. My lawyer's cross-examination revealed cracks, the impossible debt calculations, the forged signatures on loan documents, but my parents had answers for everything. Cultural differences, misunderstandings, their poor English leading to confusion. They'd prepared well. During lunch break, I received a text from an unknown number. A single word, soon. I scanned the courthouse, searching for Alice or whoever was helping her. Nothing. Just families dealing with their own dramas, their own pain. The afternoon brought character witnesses. The bank manager testified about the fraudulent accounts, the clear evidence of forgery, but the prosecutor twisted it. Maybe I'd opened those accounts myself. Maybe I was setting up my parents, creating evidence for this moment. Dr. McAlexandra spoke about my volunteer work, my dedication despite everything. The prosecutor questioned why I was working for free. Was Was it guilt? An attempt to rehabilitate my image? Every positive became suspicious in his hands. The security guard described seeing my father lurking outside the hospital, but under cross-examination, he admitted he couldn't be certain. It was dark. The man had walked away quickly. Maybe it was someone else entirely. The prosecutors really working overtime to twist volunteer work into some evil plan. Next, they'll claim helping sick people for free is clearly the mark of a dangerous criminal mind. As the first day ended, I felt the case slipping away. Truth was complicated, messy. Lies were simple, clean. My parents had crafted the perfect narrative. Elderly immigrants betrayed by their westernized son. A story everyone could understand. That night in my motel room, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside, photocopies of documents I'd never seen. Bank records from accounts my parents had hidden. Transfers to relatives overseas. Proof they'd been siphoning money for years, far beyond what they'd claimed I owed. But there was more. Medical records from when Alice was 12. Emergency room visits they'd hidden. Documentation of injuries consistent with abuse. Notes from a concerned doctor who'd tried to investigate but hit dead ends. Evidence they'd hurt her in ways I'd never known. I called my lawyer immediately. She reviewed the documents. Excitement building. This changed everything. But where had they come from? Without a source, their authenticity would be questioned. We needed whoever had provided them to come forward. The second day of hearings began with my testimony. I told my story from the beginning. The leather ledger. The threats. Alice's suffering. My parents' escalating control. The jury listened, but I saw skepticism in some faces. It sounded too extreme, too calculated. The prosecutor's cross-examination was brutal. He highlighted every inconsistency, every moment that strained credibility. Why hadn't I reported the abuse? Why had I signed contracts if I was being coerced? Why break into their house instead of handling things legally? During a break, the mysterious woman appeared at my lawyer's side. They spoke quietly, urgently. My lawyer's eyes widened. She requested an immediate meeting with the judge. Something significant was happening. In the judge's chambers, my lawyer presented the new evidence, the hidden bank accounts, the medical records. The judge reviewed them carefully, asked about their source. My lawyer hesitated, then explained that a witness had come forward but needed protection before testifying. The judge agreed to a closed session. The courtroom was cleared except for essential personnel. The mysterious woman was brought in through a side door. When she turned to face the court, my breath caught. It wasn't Alice. It was Ailey, Alice's friend from Switzerland. She introduced herself, explained her connection. Alice couldn't return without risking her safety, but she'd sent Ailey as her representative. Ailey had documents, recordings, proof of everything. She produced Alice's journals from childhood, documenting the abuse in heartbreaking detail. Photos of bruises my parents had inflicted when I'd failed tests. Audio recordings Alice had made secretly, capturing their threats. Evidence I'd never known existed. But the most damaging evidence was recent. Emails between my parents and relatives overseas, planning to flee the country with stolen funds. Discussions about silencing me permanently. Plans to find Alice using private investigators. Their desperation laid bare in digital form. My parents' lawyer objected frantically. The evidence was obtained illegally. It was hearsay. It was prejudicial. But the judge allowed it, piece by piece. The truth was finally being heard. When court resumed publicly, my parents' demeanor had changed. The confidence was gone. They sat rigid, whispering urgently with their lawyer. The tide had turned, and they knew it. The prosecutor tried to salvage his case. He questioned Ailey's credibility, her motives, but she remained calm, precise. She'd brought receipts for everything. Swiss bank records showing Alice's financial independence. School records proving she'd earned her scholarship legitimately. Medical evaluations documenting her trauma. My mother broke first. When confronted with the medical records of Alice's injuries, she began sobbing. Real tears this time, but not of remorse. Tears of rage at being exposed. She turned on my father, blaming him. He responded in kind. Their united front crumbled spectacularly. The judge called a recess to restore order. In the hallway, extended family members who'd supported my parents looked shell-shocked. The cousins who doubted me apologized. The aunts who'd received packages now understood the manipulation. The family narrative was rewriting itself in real time. When proceedings resumed, my parents' lawyer requested a meeting. They wanted to negotiate, drop the criminal charges, and they'd drop their civil suits, leave the country quietly, disappear from our lives forever. The deal they should have taken months ago. But I wasn't the same person who'd offered that deal. They'd cost me my job, my home, my reputation. They'd tried to destroy me completely. Now I wanted justice, not just escape. The judge made her decision. The breaking and entering charge stood, but with context. Probation, community service, nothing that would further damage my career. But she recommended the prosecutor investigate my parents for fraud, extortion, and child abuse. The hunters had become the hunted. My parents were arrested that afternoon. Fraud charges based on the evidence I'd gathered. Child abuse charges based on Alice's documentation. Extortion based on their recent actions. They were released on bail, but with conditions. Surrender their passports. No contact with Alice or me. Weekly check-ins with authorities. I watched them leave the courthouse, suddenly frail without their power. My mother clutched my father's arm, but there was no affection in it. Just two criminals bound by mutual destruction. They'd built their life on controlling their children. Without us, they had nothing. The extended family rallied around me. Offers of places to stay, job connections, loans to rebuild. The same network my parents had tried to turn against me now became my support system. The truth had set more than just me free. Dr. O'Theodore called with news. The hospital would review my suspension once the criminal matter was resolved. The petition had grown to hundreds of signatures. My colleagues wanted me back. My patients needed me. There was a path forward. The medical board proved more challenging. The review process would continue, but the context helped. Letters of support poured in. Character witnesses lined up. The board agreed to expedite the review, understanding the unique circumstances. Ailey stayed for a week. clinic, helping me navigate the aftermath. She brought messages from Alice. My sister was thriving in Switzerland, studying psychology, understanding our trauma. She'd built a life free from our parents' influence. She was proud of me for fighting back. We video called once, briefly. Alice looked older but peaceful. She'd dyed her hair, changed her style, become someone our parents wouldn't recognize. We didn't talk about the past, just the future. Her graduation, my eventual visit, the relationship we'd rebuild on our own terms. My parents' trial proceeded without me. I'd testified enough, given enough of my life to their drama. The evidence spoke for itself. They were convicted on multiple counts. No jail time due to their age, but hefty fines, restitution, and permanent restraining orders. They lost everything fighting the charges. The house sold to pay legal fees. The hidden accounts frozen and seized. The extended family cut contact. They'd pursued the American dream through their children's nightmares. Now they had neither. I heard they moved to a small apartment across the country. Still together, bound by shared crimes if not love. Still blaming each other. Still refusing to acknowledge what they'd done. But they were no longer my problem. The clinic offered me a permanent position once my license was reinstated. Modest pay, but meaningful work. Dr. McAlexandra became a mentor, helping me process the trauma while serving others. I found purpose beyond my parents' demands. 6 months later, my medical license was fully restored. No restrictions, no conditions. The board acknowledged the extraordinary circumstances. I could return to the hospital, to pediatrics, to the career I'd actually chosen. But I stayed at the clinic. The hospital represented my parents' dreams, not mine. The clinic was where I'd rebuilt myself, where patients saw me as a healer, not a scandal, where I could help children without remembering my own stolen childhood. I found a small apartment near the clinic. Nothing fancy, but mine. Decorated with photos of colleagues, friends, the life I was building. No leather ledgers, no debt calculations, no one tracking my failures. Alice visited for my birthday. First time in 5 years we'd been in the same room. We didn't talk much, didn't need to, just sat together, free. She gave me a photo from Switzerland, her graduation, her smile genuine, unmarked by fear. The future we'd both earned. The extended family slowly healed. Cousins reconnected. Aunts shared their own stories of suspicion and regret. We built new traditions free from my parents' poison. Holidays focused on joy, not obligation. Gatherings based on want, not debt. I started therapy, finally, processing 20 years of control and manipulation, understanding how they'd shaped me, learning to trust my own decisions, to value myself beyond achievements, to exist without constantly calculating costs. My therapist helped me understand the ledger's true purpose, not just financial control, but emotional programming. Every entry trained me to see myself as a burden. Every calculation reinforced that love was transactional. Breaking free meant more than paying debts. It meant rejecting the entire framework. The nightmares faded slowly. Some nights I still woke in panic, checking locks, reviewing evidence, but those nights grew rarer, replaced by dreams of the future, of visiting Alice, of helping children heal, of living without fear. I kept one photo from my childhood, Alice and me in the backyard, before the ledger, before the debts. This sudden avalanche of evidence appearing under the motel door makes me really curious about who's been watching this family so closely all these years. Someone clearly has been collecting proof of abuse and fraud for a very long time. Just two kids playing, innocent, free. A reminder of who we were before they tried to remake us, who we could be again. My colleagues at the clinic became chosen family. We shared meals, celebrated victories, supported each other through challenges. They knew my story, but didn't define me by it. I was just Doc to them. Someone who understood suffering and chose healing. The day I paid off my student loans felt monumental, not because I owed my parents anything, but because I'd done it myself. Every payment my choice, every dollar earned through my own work. Financial freedom to match the emotional freedom I'd fought to claim. Alice called on the anniversary of her escape. We made it tradition, celebrating the day she saved herself, and ultimately saved me too. Her courage had broken their system, shown me resistance was possible, proved that freedom existed beyond their control. I dated eventually, cautiously, explaining my past when trust developed. Some couldn't handle the complexity. Others admired the survival. I learned to recognize genuine care versus transactional interest, to accept love without calculating its cost. The clinic expanded, and I helped train new doctors, young idealists wanting to make a difference. I shared my story when relevant, showed them that purpose could emerge from pain, that serving others could heal yourself, that choosing your path mattered more than meeting expectations. One day, I received a letter forwarded from the hospital, my parents' handwriting. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. Inside, not apologies, not recognition, just requests for money, for contact, for another chance to control. I burned it like I'd burned the ledger, but without ceremony this time, just practical disposal of toxic waste. They were strangers now, DNA donors who'd lost the privilege of parenthood through their own choices. Their letters couldn't touch me anymore. Alice finished her psychology degree, specializing in family trauma. She published papers on coercive control, financial abuse, intergenerational trauma, never naming us, but helping others recognize the patterns, turning our pain into prevention for other families. We talked about writing our story someday, not for fame or revenge, but for the children still trapped in ledgers, still calculating their worth in debt, still believing love required suffering. Maybe words could reach them like Alice's escape had reached me. The clinic became my legacy, not the prestigious hospital career my parents had demanded, but a place where healing happened daily, where children got care regardless of payment, where their worth wasn't calculated in dollars, where love was freely given. I mentored young doctors facing family pressure, helped them navigate cultural expectations while claiming autonomy, showed them that honoring parents didn't require sacrificing yourself, that respect could coexist with boundaries, that choosing your path wasn't betrayal. 5 years after the trial, I felt truly free, not just legally or financially, but emotionally. The constant weight gone, the mental calculations stopped. I could make decisions without hearing their voices, could succeed or fail on my own terms. Alice and I planned a siblings trip, somewhere neither of us had been, no memories attached, just two adults choosing to spend time together, building the relationship they'd tried to destroy, proving that love could exist without ledgers. I kept all the evidence, though, boxes in storage, not from paranoia, but wisdom, proof of what happened, protection against rewriting history, documentation that validated our experience when doubt crept in, truth preserved against future manipulation. The hospital occasionally reached out about returning, prestigious positions, better pay, but I stayed at the clinic. Success meant something different now, not titles or income, but lives touched, children healed, families helped, purpose beyond profit. My apartment filled with thank you cards from patients, drawings from children, photos from families, no prestigious diplomas on the walls, just evidence of impact, proof that my worth wasn't measured in degrees or dollars, but in service freely given. I learned to cook recipes my mother had never taught me, built traditions she'd never allowed, created a home that welcomed chosen family, filled spaces with joy instead of judgment, proved that heritage could be honored without perpetuating harm. The day I realized I hadn't thought about my parents in weeks felt like a milestone. They'd consumed so much mental space for so long, but now days passed without their shadow, weeks focused on present purpose, not past pain, freedom measured in mental quiet. Alice sent photos from her practice, her office filled with resources for abuse survivors, her wall displaying degrees earned through her own effort, her smile reaching her eyes. We'd both become healers, just differently than our parents had demanded. I sometimes wondered what they told themselves, how they justified the empty apartment, the lost children, the family that abandoned them, if they ever recognized their role. But those wonderings grew brief, unimportant. Their narrative no longer concerned me. The clinic staff became expert at recognizing controlling families. We developed protocols for protecting vulnerable children, created resources for those trying to escape, built networks of support, turned our trauma into systemic change, one family at a time. My life settled into rhythm. Morning runs without checking for surveillance, work without fear of sabotage, evenings with friends who knew my worth wasn't calculated in achievements, weekends free from obligation, simple pleasures they'd taught me to see as selfish. I dated a fellow doctor who understood complicated families. She had her own stories of expectation and control. We built something based on mutual respect, not transaction. Love without ledgers, partnership without power games. Everything they'd said was impossible. The anniversary of Alice's escape remained our most important holiday. More than birthdays or traditional celebrations. The day she saved us both. We'd call, share updates, remind each other how far we'd come. Siblings by choice now, not just birth. 10 years later, I barely recognized the person I'd been. The exhausted medical student calculating every failure's cost. The desperate son trying to protect his sister through perfect grades. That person felt like a character in someone else's story. Real, but distant. Alice visited for a conference, staying with me instead of a hotel. We cooked together, laughed at inside jokes, built new memories over old foundations. Our parents had tried to make us competitors for their approval. Instead, we'd become each other's strongest supporters. She brought her partner, someone who understood her history without defining her by it. Watching them together showed me what healthy love looked like. No calculations, no debts, just two people choosing each other daily. The relationship model we'd never seen growing up. We visited the old neighborhood once, drove past the house where we'd learned that love meant ledgers. It looked smaller than memory suggested, just a house where sad things happened. No power over us anymore. We didn't even slow down. The clinic honored me for 10 years of service. No grand ceremony, just cake in the break room. Stories from colleagues about lives I'd touched, patients who'd returned to visit, families who'd found hope, the only recognition that mattered anymore. I thought about the leather ledger sometimes, wondered if burning it had been enough, if I should have kept it as evidence of their sickness. But destruction felt right. Some things deserved to become ash. Some records needed to disappear completely. Alice published her book on family financial abuse. Academic, but accessible. I read it in one sitting, recognizing our story in clinical terms. She'd transformed our trauma into scholarship, helped others understand what we'd lived, gave language to experiences that felt unspeakable. My parents never attempted contact again after that final letter. Maybe they'd found new victims. Maybe they'd finally turned on each other completely. Maybe they'd learned to live with consequences. I'd never know and no longer cared. Some stories didn't need endings. The young doctors I mentored went on to their own successes. Some chose prestigious paths. Others followed service. All did it on their own terms. I'd help them see that success had many definitions. That worth wasn't singular or calculable. That choosing mattered. I kept Alice's photo on my desk. Her graduation. Her freedom. Daily reminder of what courage looked like. What escape cost. What survival meant. When young doctors complained about family pressure, I'd share her story. Proof that breaking free was possible. The clinic expanded again. We hired social workers, added mental health services, created comprehensive care that addressed more than physical symptoms, healing whole families, not just individuals, building the support system we'd wished existed when we needed it. My chosen family grew. Friends who'd stood by me during the trial, colleagues who'd signed petitions, patients who'd become advocates. Love multiplied when freely given. Connections strengthened by choice, not obligation. The family my parents had tried to isolate me from. I learned to accept help without calculating its cost, to give without expecting returns, to exist without constant transaction. The ledger's programming faded slowly, but it faded, replaced by healthier patterns, by understanding that worth wasn't earned but inherent. Alice and I started a foundation, small, focused, therapist, helping young adults escape financial abuse, providing resources, legal aid, temporary support, named after the hiding spot where we'd left notes, where communication survived despite surveillance, where hope lived in hidden spaces. Talk about turning pain into purpose. These siblings built an entire support system from scratch, complete with protocols for spotting controlling families and a foundation named after their secret note spot. That's some next-level healing right there. The work felt like redemption, not for us, but for the children we'd been, for the protection we'd wished existed. Every person helped was a victory over the ledger, proof that cycles could break, that control could be overcome, that freedom was achievable. My life became unremarkable in the best way. No drama, no constant crisis, just steady purpose. Daily choices made freely, relationships built on trust, work that mattered, the boring beauty of autonomy. Everything they'd said would be impossible without them. I thought of them on their birthdays sometimes, not with longing or anger, just acknowledgement that they existed, that they'd shaped me through opposition, that surviving them had taught me strength. But the thoughts passed quickly, replaced by present purpose. The clinic's walls filled with success stories, children who'd grown up healthy, families who'd found support, communities that had healed. No prestigious awards, no media recognition, just quiet accumulation of lives touched, the only legacy that mattered. Alice called one random Tuesday. No anniversary or occasion, just wanted to hear my voice. We talked about nothing important. Weather, work, what we'd eaten for lunch, the casual connection we'd never been allowed, the simple pleasure of siblings who actually liked each other. I realized I'd stopped calculating. No mental ledger tracking failures, no constant computation of worth, decisions made without referencing their values, opinions formed without their influence, the final freedom, forgetting to remember them. The young doctor shadowing me asked about work-life balance. I laughed, remembering when life was all work, all calculation, explained that balance meant choosing, that worth existed beyond achievement, that success included rest, lessons learned through painful experience. My apartment became a gathering place, dinners with chosen family, game nights with colleagues, holiday celebrations with others estranged from birth families, creating traditions based on joy, not obligation, proving that family could be built, not just born into. Alice's next visit felt different, lighter. We spent less time processing the past, more time enjoying the present, cooked meals without discussing old hunger, laughed without referencing old tears, built new memories untainted by trauma, the relationship we'd always deserved. I stopped checking for surveillance, stopped documenting every interaction, stopped living in defensive mode. The hypervigilance faded, trust grew, the world became less dangerous. Not because threats disappeared, but because I'd proven I could survive them. The clinic received a large anonymous donation. I suspected Alice, but she denied it. Maybe a grateful family, maybe someone who understood our mission. Money given freely, without strings, the opposite of everything the ledger had represented. Generosity without calculation. I mentored a young woman whose parents had their own ledger. Different culture, same control. Helped her understand the pattern, plan her escape, build her future. Watched her transform from frightened to free. Proof that our story wasn't unique, but survival was possible. My colleagues joked about my Spartan office. No diplomas displayed, no awards showcased, just patient artwork and family photos. The achievements that mattered couldn't be framed. The worth that counted couldn't be displayed. The success that satisfied couldn't be seen. Alice sent updates from conferences where she spoke. Rooms full of professionals learning to recognize financial abuse, families understanding generational trauma, systems changing slowly but surely, our pain transformed into prevention, our survival becoming others' roadmap. I finally felt ready to date seriously, found someone who understood that love meant choice, that commitment didn't require control, that partnership involved equality. We built slowly, carefully, testing trust, establishing boundaries, creating something healthy from scratch. The foundation grew beyond our initial vision. Volunteers who'd escaped their own ledgers, donors who understood the cause, partnerships with other organizations, a network of support we desperately needed, now available for others facing familiar prisons. My life found rhythm without rigidity, structure without suffocation, purpose without pressure, the balance they'd never taught because it threatened their control. Days filled with chosen obligations, evenings free from calculated worth, the life they'd said would be empty. I kept one thing from the trial, the photo of them being arrested, not for satisfaction, though that existed, but as reminder that consequences were real, that justice, however imperfect, was possible, that standing up to abuse could succeed. Evidence for dark days when doubt crept in. Alice published another paper, this one on sibling bonds under coercive control, how abusers used children against each other, how survival often meant temporary separation, how healing required rebuilding connection. Our story in academic language, helping others understand. The clinic became teaching hospital affiliated, students rotating through, learning that medicine meant more than procedures, that healing addressed more than symptoms, that worth wasn't measured in billing codes. The lessons I'd learned too late, passed on earlier. I spoke at the medical school occasionally, not about my story specifically, but about recognizing abuse, supporting colleagues facing family pressure, maintaining boundaries while respecting culture. The talk I'd wished someone had given when I was drowning in expectations. My chosen family evolved as people moved, married, changed, but the core remained. Those who'd stood by during the trial, who'd believed when evidence felt thin, who'd offered support without calculating its cost. The family built on choice, not chance. Alice and I planned our parents' eventual funeral arrangements, not from obligation, but practicality. Simple cremation, no service, no gathering of mourners who'd enabled them, just basic disposal when time came. The final boundary, refusing to perform grief we didn't feel. I realized I'd found happiness, not the desperate achievement they'd demanded, but quiet quiet satisfaction, daily purpose, genuine connections, the life they'd called selfish, the existence they'd said would shame them, the freedom they'd tried to prevent. The ledger's shadow finally lifted completely, no longer influencing decisions, no longer calculating worth, just historical artifact from a painful past, proof of what I'd survived, evidence of what I'd overcome, but no longer defining present or future. Alice visited for my 40th birthday. We looked at old photos, marveling at the children who'd survived, who'd protected each other imperfectly, but genuinely, who'd found different paths to freedom, who'd rebuilt connection from destruction, siblings by birth, friends by choice. She brought news. Our parents were ill, aging, alone, still together in their misery, still refusing accountability. The extended family had shared updates, wondering if we'd reconcile, if illness would soften our boundaries, if approaching death would inspire forgiveness. We discussed it briefly, decided nothing had changed. Illness didn't erase abuse. Age didn't excuse cruelty. Approaching death didn't demand reconciliation. We'd grieved our parents years ago. These strangers' mortality meant nothing. The decision felt clean, clear. The clinic celebrated 15 years of my service. Colleagues shared stories. Patients returned to visit. The impact was tangible, visible. Lives changed. Families healed. Communities strengthened. The legacy that mattered. The worth that counted. The success that satisfied. I trained the next generation of clinic doctors, taught them to see beyond symptoms, to recognize hidden abuse, to offer resources without judgment, to understand that healing meant more than medicine, that sometimes the prescription was simply believing someone's truth. Alice's foundation merged with ours. International reach now. Resources in multiple languages. Culturally sensitive approaches. Recognizing that financial abuse crossed all boundaries. That ledgers existed everywhere. That freedom required support. Our personal made universal. My life settled into contentment. Morning coffee without anxiety. Work without desperation. Evenings without calculation. Weekends without obligation. The simple pleasure of autonomous existence. Of choosing daily. Of living freely. Of being enough without proof. I sometimes taught at Alice's conferences. Two siblings sharing different perspectives on survival. How abuse affected each child differently. How escape required different strategies. How healing happened at different paces. Our story instructive without being prescriptive. The clinic expanded mental health services. Hired trauma specialists. Created comprehensive care addressing root causes. Healing generational patterns. Breaking cycles. Building healthier families. The work we'd wished existed when we needed it. Now available for others. My relationship deepened into marriage. A partnership of equals. Decisions made together. Finances shared without control. Love expressed without calculation. The healthy model we'd never witnessed. Built from scratch. Proven possible despite our programming. Alice became godmother to my children. Taught them their worth was inherent. That love wasn't transactional. That family meant choice. The lessons we'd learned late, passed on early. The cycle broken. The pattern changed. The future different. We created new traditions. Holidays celebrating freedom. Anniversaries marking survival. Gatherings based on joy. No ledgers. No debts. No calculations. Just connection. Just choice. Just the family we'd built from the ashes of the one we'd escaped. The foundation helped thousands escape their own ledgers. Each success proving parents wrong. What's making me wonder is this calculated approach to planning their parents' funeral while they're still alive. There's something oddly practical yet cold about cremation arrangements for people who aren't dead yet. That we weren't selfish. That our freedom mattered. That breaking free helped others. That survival was service. That our worth multiplied when shared freely. I found peace in the ordinary. Grocery shopping without checking for surveillance. Sleeping without nightmares. Living without fear. The boring beauty of safety. Of autonomy. Of freedom. Everything they'd said would be impossible. Everything they'd tried to prevent. My children grew up visiting the clinic, seeing service modeled, understanding that worth meant contribution, that success had many forms, that helping others helped yourself. The values I'd discovered despite my upbringing, passed on naturally, not forced. Alice wrote about our parents' deaths when they came, clinical, detached, analyzing how abusers often died alone, how consequences accumulated, how bridges burned stayed ash, the academic distance that let her process, the professional framework that contained personal pain. We didn't attend the funerals, sent no flowers, felt no guilt. The extended family understood by then. Our absence spoke louder than presence would have. The final boundary held. The last test passed. The ultimate proof that we'd truly broken free. Their estate was minimal. The wealth they'd accumulated through fraud long gone. Legal fees, restitution, failed schemes. They'd died as they'd lived, calculating worth that didn't exist, chasing debts that weren't real, together but alone. The ending they'd written themselves. We donated their ashes to medical research. The final utility. The last transaction. Bodies serving science since lives had served only themselves. No grave to visit, no marker to maintain, no shrine to their memory, just disposal, just done. The clinic thrived, expanded to multiple locations, trained hundreds of doctors, served thousands of families, built the alternative to for-profit medicine, proved that healing didn't require wealth, that worth wasn't measured in billing, that service satisfied more than success. My marriage produced children who knew only healthy love, who never calculated their worth, who understood that grades mattered less than growth. That achievement meant contribution. That family meant support. The childhood we'd never had, given freely to them. Alice's books became required reading in psychology programs. Our story, anonymized but recognizable, teaching others how financial abuse operated, how children survived, how healing happened, how cycles broke. The personal made educational, the painful made purposeful. I retired from the clinic at 65, not because I had to, but because I could. The freedom to choose, to rest, to exist without constant productivity productivity, the luxury they'd said we'd never afford, the life they'd said would be wasted, the peace they'd tried to prevent. My days filled with grandchildren, teaching them to cook, reading stories, building memories, no ledgers, no calculations, just presence, just joy, just the relationships that mattered, the connections that counted, the love that lasted. Alice and I grew old differently than our parents, surrounded by chosen family, supported by those we'd helped, connected through genuine care, the wealth that mattered, the success that satisfied, the worth that couldn't be calculated, the freedom we'd fought to find. Whew, time seriously flies when you're out here tossing truth bombs and stacking real kindness instead of fake IOUs. Catch you next time, legends. Subscribe for more content like this.